My name is Maya Collins, and I'm 32 years old. When people say a single moment can change your life, they usually mean something dramatic: a proposal, a birth, a death, a phone call in the middle of the night. For me, it was a blurry photo on Instagram. I was lying in a hospital bed, with my left leg held together by metal pins, 3 cracked ribs making every breath feel like punishment, and a concussion that turned the ceiling lights into halos. A man had run a red light and slammed into my car so hard, the doctors kept saying I was lucky.
Lucky.
That word sounded strange when I couldn't even sit up without help. My boyfriend Richard visited once. 20 minutes. He stood near the foot of my bed like I was contagious, scrolling on his phone, saying hospitals made him anxious. I just need to process this, he told me. This. My accident. My pain. My body broken under white sheets. I remember staring at him, waiting for him to laugh and say he was kidding. But Richard never noticed silence unless it inconvenienced him. My best friend Anastasia stayed 3 nights. She slept in a chair that looked designed by someone who hated spines. She brought me soup, braided my hair when I couldn't lift my arms, and helped me to the bathroom without once making me feel small. That's why I noticed her face change. She was scrolling on her phone when her mouth tightened. Not shock, exactly. More like anger trying to hide behind politeness. "What?" I asked. "Nothing." "Anastasia." She turned the screen away too late. I reached for the phone. Pain meds made me bold, and heartbreak made me faster than I should have been. There he was. Richard. At a party. His arm wrapped around Katie, his ex-girlfriend, both of them grinning like they'd just escaped a prison sentence. Under the picture, his caption read, "Finally free from the needy drama queen and her constant demands." For a second, the hospital sounds disappeared. No beeping machines, no footsteps, no distant voices from the hallway. Just those words. Needy drama queen. 4 years. 4 years of paying most of the rent because Richard's credit was temporarily damaged. 4 years of him being between jobs, while somehow always having money for gaming equipment, new shoes, drinks with friends, and rare collectibles he insisted would be worth something someday. 4 years of lending him my car more often than he asked how I was feeling. 4 years of telling myself he had potential. And while I was lying in a hospital bed, he was celebrating freedom from me. The comments were worse. "Happy for you, bro. You deserve better." Finally! Not one person wrote, "Isn't Maya in the hospital?" I didn't comment. I didn't text. I didn't call. Something inside me went very still. Not calm. Not numb. Still. Like the moment before a storm breaks. Anastasia gently took the phone back. "Maya." I looked at her and whispered, "My name is the only one on the lease." Her eyes changed then. She understood before I said another word. Richard had always treated my kindness like a renewable resource, like I would keep giving and giving because love had made me soft. But lying there, bruised and stitched and abandoned, I realized something. Love had not made me soft. It had made me patient. And my patience was dead. Over the next 2 days, I made calls from that hospital bed. My landlord, my brother Dylan, my cousin who knew enough about tenant rules to tell me where I stood. I kept my voice steady, even when my hands shook. Richard texted once, asking where I kept the charger for his backup controller. Not how I was. Not whether I needed anything. A charger. That was the last gift he gave me. Clarity. When I was discharged, I didn't go home. Anastasia brought me to her apartment, set me up in her guest room, and placed my pain pills, water bottle, and phone within reach, like she was preparing a command center. Then Dylan arrived at my apartment with 2 coworkers and a stack of boxes. Richard had been coming and going while I recovered, probably assuming I would eventually cry, forgive him, and apologize for being difficult. Instead, my brother packed every piece of him out of my life. The gaming monitors, the custom keyboard he bought with money that should have gone to groceries, The limited edition figurines he treated better than our relationship. The sports memorabilia he refused to let me move, though he had never paid for the wall it hung on. Clothes, shoes, cables, empty beer bottles, unopened bills. Every trace of the man who called me needy after needing me for 4 years. Dylan called me from the apartment. "You sure?" I looked down at my cast, at the bruises blooming across my arms, at Anastasia quietly folding laundry in the doorway because she knew I needed someone there. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." They didn't smash anything. They didn't make a scene. They simply carried Richard's life to the dumpster behind the building. The compost king, as he once called himself when we first met at a community garden project, finally returned to where he belonged, among things discarded because they had started to rot. I kept one small box aside: birth certificate, medical papers, old family photos. I wasn't cruel enough to destroy what couldn't be replaced, but I was done protecting a man who had never protected me. The next morning, my phone began vibrating before I even opened my eyes. "Richard. Where is my stuff? Are you insane? You can't do this to me." Everything I own was there. Then came the shift. "Baby, please." I was drunk. "Katie means nothing. I love you. You're the only one I want." I stared at the messages until the words blurred, not from tears, but from exhaustion. Then his mother Deborah started calling. Deborah, who once told me Richard was sensitive when I asked him to help with bills. Deborah, who looked at me like I should be grateful her son had chosen me. Her voicemail was half sob, half threat. "Maya, you need to reconsider what you've done. My son made a mistake, but you are ruining his life." I almost laughed, because Richard had stood over the wreckage of mine and posted a caption. And now they wanted mercy. But mercy, I was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as surrender. By the time Deborah called for the 18th time, I had memorized the pattern. First came crying, then guilt, then anger, then the threats wrapped in fake concern. I finally answered on call number 44 because Anastasia threatened to throw my phone off her balcony if it buzzed one more time during movie night. I was propped against 3 pillows with my injured leg elevated, eating sour cream and onion chips straight from the bag because emotional collapse apparently pairs well with sodium. The second I answered, Deborah inhaled dramatically. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed. "Maya, sweetheart, Richard is devastated." I stared at the ceiling. Funny. I'd been devastated too when I woke up in the hospital and realized my boyfriend had chosen a party over me. But apparently my heartbreak had been less urgent. "He hasn't stopped crying," she continued. "I've never seen him like this." I nearly choked on a chip. Richard cried when his gaming account got suspended for profanity. Richard cried when his favorite sports team lost. Richard cried when his car got repossessed because he ignored 6 months of payments. But somehow, those tears had never inspired Deborah to call 44 times. "I'm sure this is hard for him," I said flatly. "Maya, do you understand how valuable some of those collectibles were? His grandfather gave him those baseball cards." I closed my eyes. "Do you know what else has value, Deborah? Rent. Electricity. Insurance. Groceries. Orthopedic surgery." But somehow, nobody ever called crying about those. Then came the line that almost made me laugh hard enough to crack another rib. Richard was planning to propose. Anastasia, sitting beside me, mouthed, "No way," while trying not to spit out wine. I imagined the proposal. Probably between gaming matches while I cooked dinner he didn't help pay for. Unless the engagement ring was made from unpaid bills and broken promises, I wasn't interested. Deborah kept talking. "You've destroyed his life." Destroyed. That word echoed strangely, considering I was the one learning how to shower sitting down because my boyfriend abandoned me emotionally the moment I became inconvenient. Then she said something that shifted the entire conversation. "Richard told me you controlled all the finances and isolated him from people." I laughed. Not a cute laugh. Not polite. A full-body, painful, incredulous laugh that made Anastasia grab my arm because I was wheezing. Me? Controlling finances? Richard once spent our grocery money on a limited edition gaming keyboard with glowing rainbow lights because it was an investment. Richard borrowed $3,000 from me for a crypto opportunity that disappeared faster than his employment history. Richard considered paying half the utilities, helping me out. I let Deborah finish speaking before I quietly asked, "When was the last time Richard paid rent?" Silence. Actual silence. Finally, she said carefully, "He told me you two had an arrangement." What arrangement? He handled other expenses. I looked at Anastasia, whose eyebrows had practically disappeared into her hairline. What expenses exactly? I asked. Deborah didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer. There never had been. So I told her everything. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just facts. I told her I'd covered nearly all household bills for 4 years. I told her about the overtime shifts, the freelance work, the nights I stayed awake, calculating which bill could be delayed without destroying my credit. I told her about selling my grandmother's jewelry last year because Richard swore money was coming soon. I told her about the credit card debt, the hidden notices, the fake promises, the lies. By the end of the conversation, Deborah sounded different. Smaller somehow. But he said he was supporting you, she whispered. That one sentence told me everything. Richard hadn't just manipulated me. He had built an entirely fictional version of himself for everyone around him. The hard-working boyfriend. The generous provider. The patient man trapped with a difficult woman. Meanwhile, I had been quietly drowning while protecting his image. Classic Maya behavior. I promised Deborah I would send proof. Bank statements. Receipts. Messages. Not because I needed validation, but because I was done carrying Richard's lies for him. When the call ended, Anastasia slowly lowered her wine glass. Well, she said, that family tree is diseased. I snorted so hard, my ribs screamed. The next day, Dylan came over to help organize the remaining paperwork from the apartment. That's when we found more receipts, more purchases, more evidence that Richard somehow always had money for himself. Gaming subscriptions, sports betting apps, luxury sneakers, craft beer tastings. One receipt showed he spent $400 at a steakhouse 3 days before telling me he couldn't help with electricity. Another showed he bought Katie drinks weeks before my accident. Weeks. Meaning the Instagram post wasn't some drunken accident. It was planned. The realization settled into my chest like cold rain. Richard hadn't suddenly betrayed me. He had simply stopped hiding who he was. Dylan looked furious as he sorted papers. I should have punched him years ago. You offered. Yeah, but you loved him. That was the problem. I had loved Richard in the hopeful way women sometimes love unfinished men. Like if we just gave enough patience, enough support, enough understanding, they would eventually become the version of themselves they kept promising existed underneath the chaos. But potential is not a relationship. Potential doesn't pay rent. Potential doesn't sit beside your hospital bed. Potential doesn't choose you when things get ugly. That night, my phone buzzed again. Not Deborah. Richard. An email this time. Subject line, please just read this. I should have deleted it. Instead, I opened it. 5 pages. 5 entire pages explaining how scared he'd been after my accident. How seeing me injured made him spiral. How Katie didn't mean anything. How the social media post was just a joke. A joke. Apparently, public humiliation counted as humor now. Then came the emotional finale. I know I messed up, Maya, but losing you made me realize you're my home. Home. Interesting word from a man who hadn't paid rent in 3 months. I stared at the screen for a long time before finally typing 4 words. "You already lost me." Then I blocked his email for exactly 11 minutes, because Richard immediately began messaging from another account, then another, then texting from unknown numbers, then sending voice notes. Anastasia listened to one and nearly threw my phone. "Maya," she said slowly, "your ex-boyfriend sounds like a youth pastor trying to sell a timeshare." The worst part? A tiny part of me still hurt hearing him cry. Not because I wanted him back, but because grief doesn't disappear the moment betrayal arrives. You mourn the future you thought existed, the version of the relationship you kept trying to save, and maybe most painfully, the version of yourself who believed love would eventually be enough. 3 days later, Remy, Richard's old college roommate, messaged me. Apparently Richard had been sleeping on his couch. Apparently he cried constantly. Apparently he was also planning a huge romantic gesture to win me back. I laughed until tears rolled down my face. Not sad tears. Exhausted ones. "Did he say what the gesture is?" I asked. Remy replied almost immediately. "No idea, but he keeps talking about transformation and growth." Anastasia looked over my shoulder. "Oh no," she whispered. "He's going to weaponize compost again, isn't he?" And somehow, deep in my bones, I knew she was right. 3 days later, the doorman at Anastasia's building called upstairs, sounding deeply confused. Miss Collins? There's a delivery for you." I wasn't expecting anything. Anastasia frowned. "Maybe flowers?" If only. Since my legs still made stairs feel like a death trap, Anastasia went down alone, while I waited on the couch, scrolling apartment listings. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. When she finally came back upstairs, she looked like someone who had witnessed a crime against common sense. "What?" I asked. She slowly stepped aside. And there it was. A compost bin. An actual plastic compost bin full of dirt, vegetable scraps, worms, and the unmistakable smell of decay. I blinked. Anastasia blinked. The worms blinked, probably embarrassed to be involved. On top sat a folded, handwritten note. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. "Like compost, our love can break down and rebuild into something stronger. I'm decomposing my old self to become the man you deserve. Please give us another chance to grow together. Richard." For 3 full seconds, the apartment was silent. Then Anastasia collapsed onto the floor, laughing so violently she couldn't breathe. I wish I could say I remained dignified. I did not. I laughed until my ribs screamed. Until tears streamed down my face. Until I genuinely questioned whether this man had survived adulthood entirely through audacity. "The compost king strikes again," Anastasia gasped between wheezes. But then she frowned. There's something inside it. Of course there was. Because Richard never understood boundaries, hygiene, or symbolism. Anastasia carefully dug through the dirt with a wooden spoon, like she was excavating cursed treasure. Then she pulled out a tiny velvet ring box, covered in compost. I stared at it. Absolutely not. "Oh, we're opening it," she said immediately. Inside sat the ugliest ring I had ever seen. Fake gold. Plastic diamond. The kind of jewelry that turns your finger green during light humidity. And engraved inside was a date. April 22nd, 2021. I froze. That date wasn't meaningful to Richard and me, but I recognized it instantly. Katie's birthday. The room went silent again. This man had not only proposed with costume jewelry hidden inside rotting garbage. He had recycled a ring meant for another woman. The sheer laziness of it almost impressed me. Anastasia looked horrified. "Maya?" I suddenly felt tired. Not angry. Not devastated. Just profoundly tired. Like my soul had finally accepted what my heart had been fighting for years. Richard didn't love me. Not really. He loved access. Access to my apartment, my money, my forgiveness, my emotional labor, my stability. And now that all of that was gone, he was panicking because survival suddenly required effort. I picked up my phone and typed exactly one sentence. The compost bin is exactly where our relationship belongs. Then I blocked him again. Anastasia carried the entire bin downstairs herself and sent me a video of her dumping it into the building dumpster while whispering, "Return to the earth, demon." Honestly, therapy is great, but friendship like that heals faster. Later that evening, Deborah finally emailed me back. The subject line read, "I owe you an apology." I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The email was long, painfully long. You could practically track her emotional breakdown paragraph by paragraph. At first, she denied everything. Then she accused me of manipulating records. Then she asked why I never came to her for help. Finally, near the end, the tone changed completely. I am beginning to realize my son has lied to everyone around him for years. I treated you unfairly because I believed him. I am deeply sorry. I read that line 3 times. An apology from Deborah felt like spotting a unicorn in traffic. She called shortly afterward. Just once this time. No screaming. No guilt trips. Just exhaustion. "Maya," she said quietly, "Richard told us you couldn't keep a job." I almost laughed again. I'd worked at the same company for 6 years. 2 promotions. Excellent performance reviews. Meanwhile, Richard treated employment like a seasonal hobby. "He told us he paid for the apartment," Deborah continued shakily. "He said the car was his. He said you had spending problems." Every sentence felt like another brick falling from a wall I hadn't realized existed. The man had created an entirely fictional version of our relationship. Not just online. Everywhere. To his family. His friends. Even Katie. Deborah sounded humiliated. "I gave him money," she admitted softly. "So much money." "How much?" There was a long pause. 15,000 over the last 2 years. I closed my eyes. $15,000. While I sold family jewelry to keep us afloat. While I worked overtime with migraines. While I cried in grocery store parking lots, calculating whether I could afford both gas and food. The betrayal suddenly felt bigger than infidelity. It was theft. Not just financially. Emotionally. Psychologically. Richard had stolen reality itself and replaced it with a version where he was always the victim. Deborah's voice cracked. "I think I enabled him." That sentence hit harder than expected. Because she was right. But so had I. I had protected Richard from consequences for years because I confused rescuing someone with loving them. The call ended strangely gently. "I love my son," Deborah whispered. "But for the first time in his life, I think he needs to face what he's done." Afterward, I sat quietly on Anastasia's couch while rain tapped against the windows. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel rage. Just clarity. Then my Instagram notifications exploded. Katie had messaged me. "Hey, I just found out you were actually in the hospital during all of this. Richard told me you two broke up months ago. I'm really sorry." I stared at the message. Poor Katie. She wasn't the villain here. Just another woman caught in Richard's web of selective truth. We talked briefly. She confirmed he'd been messaging her long before my accident, claiming our relationship was basically over. She even offered screenshots. I declined. At some point, pain becomes repetitive instead of informative. I already knew enough. That night, around midnight, the doorman downstairs called again. This time, his voice sounded irritated. "Your ex-boyfriend is here." My stomach tightened. Apparently, Richard was in the lobby, demanding to see me. Yelling. Crying. Claiming he just wanted to explain. The doorman refused to let him upstairs. Then Richard started pounding on the front desk, while several residents filmed him. The police were called. But before they arrived, Richard fled. Cowardice, his most reliable personality trait. 5 minutes later, my phone exploded. 37 missed calls in under 2 hours. Voicemails ranging from pathetic to manipulative. Maya, please. You're ruining my life. I have nowhere to go. Then the final one. If you don't call me back, I might do something desperate. That one chilled me. Not because I believed he would hurt himself, but because Richard always weaponized emotional panic whenever he lost control. I called for a wellness check anyway, because despite everything, I still didn't want him dead. Just gone. The police later confirmed he was fine. Emotional, the officer said carefully. I almost laughed at the understatement. An hour later, Remy texted me. Richard isn't staying here anymore. Caught him stealing cash from my wallet. Changed the locks. I stared at the message. Even now. Even after losing everything. Richard was still taking from people. That was the moment something final snapped inside me. Not violently. Quietly. Like a rope finally fraying apart after years under pressure. I didn't love him anymore. I loved the memory of who I thought he could become. And that man never actually existed. A month after the accident, I moved into my new apartment. It was smaller than my old place, but it felt lighter somehow. No giant gaming setup glowing at 3 in the morning. No empty beer bottles hidden behind furniture. No tension hanging in the air every time bills were due. Just quiet. Beautiful, peaceful quiet. The apartment had a tiny balcony, barely large enough for 2 chairs and a few planters, but the second I saw it, I knew it was mine. I bought basil, rosemary, and tiny tomato plants the same week I moved in. Anastasia joked that after surviving the compost king, I had earned the right to grow things that were actually alive. My cast came off 2 weeks early. Physical therapy was brutal. Every step felt like my body remembering trauma in real time. Sweat soaked through my shirts. Some nights I cried from frustration after sessions because healing was slower than I wanted. But every painful step forward still felt better than standing still beside Richard for 4 years. I also bought a used Ford with the insurance payout from my totaled car. I named her Freedom. Yes, it was dramatic. No, I do not regret it. Meanwhile, Richard apparently decided humiliation wasn't enough and escalated into performance art. One afternoon, Dylan called me laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Your ex started a GoFundMe. I sat upright immediately. A what? A GoFundMe. Maya, I swear I'm not joking. The title read, Homeless After Girlfriend's Revenge. I wish I could say I was surprised. According to Richard's completely fictional story, I had apparently stolen his money, destroyed priceless family heirlooms, emotionally abused him, and thrown him out after a minor misunderstanding. Minor misunderstanding. As if publicly humiliating your hospitalized girlfriend and financially exploiting her for years was equivalent to forgetting an anniversary. He uploaded photos of himself looking devastated on Remy's couch, complete with strategically messy hair and sad lighting, like he was auditioning for an indie heartbreak film. His fundraising goal? $5,000. Anastasia nearly passed out laughing. The fundraiser lasted 6 hours. 6. Because multiple people reported it for fraud, including Dylan, Anastasia, and several mutual friends. Even better, strangers began commenting links to online posts exposing Richard's behavior. Apparently, public manipulation becomes less effective when receipts exist. That was when Richard truly unraveled. He showed up at my old apartment building screaming about lies, revenge, and his property. Neighbors later told me he looked sweaty and frantic, pacing outside like a man losing an argument with reality itself. The police arrived. Richard claimed he lived there. Unfortunately for him, reality remained deeply inconvenient. The landlord confirmed Richard was not on the lease. He had no mail there. No legal documentation. Nothing. Then things became even more ridiculous. While checking his information, police discovered Richard had an outstanding warrant for unpaid traffic tickets. $1,200 worth. Apparently, he'd been hiding those notices too. So, yes, Richard got arrested. Not for emotional manipulation. Not for harassment. Not for financial exploitation. Traffic tickets. Honestly, if someone wrote this story in a movie script, people would call it unrealistic. He spent 2 nights in jail before his brother bailed him out. Not Deborah. That detail mattered. Because according to Deborah, for the first time in Richard's life, the family had stopped rescuing him. Consequences had finally arrived. And unlike me, consequences did not fall for tears. After that, the silence began. No calls. No emails. No fake emergencies. No dramatic voice messages at 3 a.m. Nothing. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept expecting another meltdown. Another compost metaphor. Another public pity campaign. But days passed. Then weeks. Finally, Richard's brother reached out. Briefly. Respectfully. Apparently, Richard had moved in with him under strict conditions. Pay rent, keep a job, attend therapy, stop contacting me entirely. I read the message twice.
Therapy.
A small part of me hoped it was true. Not because I wanted him back. God, no. But because I wouldn't wish being Richard on anyone. Imagine spending your whole life running from responsibility, manipulating love into survival, confusing attention with affection. What an exhausting way to exist. As for me, I started therapy too. At first, I thought I'd spend every session talking about Richard. Instead, we talked about me. Why I ignored red flags. Why I equated being needed with being loved. Why fixing broken people made me feel valuable. Those conversations hurt more than the breakup sometimes. Because facing someone else's manipulation is easier than facing your own self-abandonment. One session shattered me completely. My therapist asked quietly, "When was the last time you felt emotionally safe with Richard?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because I genuinely couldn't remember. Not for months. Maybe years. I had been surviving the relationship long before it ended. That realization sat in my chest for days. Deborah reached out one final time, asking if I would meet her for lunch. Part of me wanted to refuse. But another part remembered she had been lied to too. So I went. She chose a restaurant with elevator access because of my leg. Richard would never have thought of that. Funny, the tiny things that reveal genuine care. Deborah looked older somehow, tired around the eyes. We talked honestly for nearly 2 hours. She admitted Richard's father had behaved similarly during their marriage. Irresponsible with money, emotionally manipulative, constantly needing rescue. "I think I normalized it," she whispered. "I kept protecting him instead of preparing him. For the first time, I didn't see her as the villain. Just another woman who had spent years carrying a man who refused to grow up." Before we left, she handed me an envelope. Inside was $2,000. I immediately tried to give it back. "No," she said firmly. "This isn't from Richard. This is from me." I stared at her. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes. "Deborah, I failed you too," she whispered. "And I'm sorry." I used that money to furnish my new apartment. A new couch. New dishes. A bookshelf. Not a single item carried memories of Richard. That mattered more than I expected. Sometimes healing looks dramatic. Sometimes it's just sitting alone on your tiny balcony at sunset, realizing nobody is draining the life out of you anymore. Tonight I'm writing this while Anastasia is sprawled across my couch, criticizing reality television like it's an Olympic sport. My leg still aches sometimes. Certain songs still hurt. There are moments I feel angry all over again. But mostly, I feel free. Like I survived something I didn't even realize was slowly destroying me. Richard once said, compost was about breaking things down to create something better. Ironically, that turned out to be true. Because losing him destroyed the version of me that accepted crumbs disguised as love. And from that wreckage, someone stronger finally grew.